Hello, the following is a recorded webinar on the science of reading hosted December 19th, 2019 by myself, Olivia Wiseman, the Literacy and Family Engagement Consultant for the Educational Service Center of Lorain County and State Support Team Region 2, as well as Nancy Osco, our Regional Early Literacy Specialist for State Support Team Region 2. You will see that we did have to cut out a portion of the recording when we had to move rooms. Also, if you have any questions, our emails appear at the end of the webinar. Feel free to contact us and we will do our best to support you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about the science of reading today. And here are our goals for what we're going to get out of today is we want you to be able to explain the simple view of reading and explain and share the importance of it. So we're going to talk about the why behind it in the science of reading and then what it is and how we do it to some length. This is our overview to get you started into the depth of the science of reading. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but it's the state strategic plan, Each Child, Our Future. This is where we're all tasked to challenge, prepare, and empower the whole child. And when we look through this document, you will see that literacy appears in multiple places, in the 4 learning domains, but also in the 10 priority strategies, because the state has identified that literacy is a lever to improve our whole child. If we are able to empower them with literacy and the ability to read, they'll be able to access all other academics and improve social and emotionally as well. So we want to work with the whole child, and literacy is one of the key factors to getting them there. This is the next part, and this is a really important one. If you haven't looked at this or printed it, I would encourage you to. This is Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. It's a 50-page document, and it's not difficult to get through. There's a lot of graphics. Some of it you will be seeing those pieces today, some of those pieces, but it's a really helpful tool to see where we're headed in Ohio, which is aligned with the science of reading. So that's why it's important for us to all be aware of it. It is also aligned with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. And the understanding of why helps supports the work that we need to do within our districts as a system and with our students.
And I'm going to ask you, Olivia.
We appreciate you guys letting us know what was working and not working there so that we can remedy the situation. So back to Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. So Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement is a fantastic tool for you to go to. It's got a lot of the pieces we're going to talk about today in it, but it's steeped in the science of reading. So understanding the science of reading is the background that you need to be able to align with our state plan. Here are some of the reasons why, some of the why behind it.
And Olivia, can I just share with the group, I'm not on video, so I hope you can hear me. Be looking for, if you've printed it already, be looking for a revised version of the plan that should be out after the first of the year. The more we learn as a state and the more understanding we get, the plans will continue to be like any plan a district has that'll live and breathe and grow and change. And over the summer, a team of us worked on those revisions. And so they're just now sitting in legal. So it will adjust. So periodically check those for the latest version, please.
Yeah. Just like if you haven't noticed, third grade reading guarantee had an update to the document. So that's one that's recently updated that links to our literacy work. Okay, so it's some of the why. So when we look in first grade, 79% of the variance in comprehension is based on decoding skills. I would say that most likely, I see some head nods, that's probably not very shocking information. I think that we all know that first grade level where we're teaching a lot of those decoding skills, we expect that to play a role in their understanding of reading. But here's another piece to that. In 8th grade, 40% of the variance in comprehension is based on decoding skills. So think about that for a second. So what does this mean in regards of our instruction? What would you say that that means in regards to our instruction? Let me see.
I'm looking for Jeff.
We need to continue to teach decoding.
Yep, continue to teach decoding. And would that look the same, or what would that look like as we move in the upper grades?
Moving to multisyllabic words.
What was that?
That the decoding is versed in more complex text, multisyllabic words as opposed to CVC words, and then leads to comprehension in passages as opposed to sentences.
Correct. So, and also that links to later, we're going to be talking about the big 5 ideas of literacy, just briefly touching on. But as we move to adolescent literacy, it goes into advanced word work, which is looking at those morphemes, multisyllabic words. How do we attack those different strategies to support it across the curriculum? Okay. So it does play a role even as we move up the grades. And this is where we say to everyone's a reading teacher, right? Everyone. But we know that we have a national crisis in literacy. So when we look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP results, their new ones just came out from 2019. These are our gold standard of assessment because they have high technical quality, and they give us some really valuable information when we look as a nation where we're at and progressing for our students. And when the results came out, they've said that 35% of 4th graders performed at or above proficient. Now thinking about that for a second, 35% at or above. That means we have 65% that are below. Does that surprise anyone, or kind of align with the way you think things are going in your classrooms? Or in your district?
I don't think it's
No, it's
surprising.
not surprising. Over the last couple of years, there's been a shift in how they are learning.
Yeah. So it hasn't been a shock to you. Well, and even when they look at 8th grade students, only 34% of 8th graders performed at or above. So it's 66% off. So to me, like, that's so concerning when I think about, I've got children, and thinking about them, how do we get to more kids and make them literate and be able to be at or above benchmark? How do we get there? So a consideration is, what does your data say about the strengths of your systematic supports within your district? So what does the data tell you about the way things are set up, your framework within your district, to make sure we're supporting staff and students to all become literate? And you may not have an answer to that right now, but I want it to be something in the back of your head you're thinking about as we go through these other pieces today, and as you walk away from today and going back into your districts. So another thing that we have that's really important to know is that all 50 states have to write a corrective action plan for language and literacy. All 50. So we know, again, like we said, it's a national crisis. This is a piece that's everywhere. It's not just Ohio. It is our whole nation and how we are addressing this. Anything to add to that,
Well,
Nancy?
and truly, Julie's talking about that national crisis. When I go to the state level meetings around the country, we even see, Puerto Rico there and U.S. Virgin Islands represented, and so I'm gonna expand that a little bit more, Olivia, to thinking about a global crisis for how we're teaching it, and what can we do about it, and what do we need to do first. Those are my thoughts that I go to when I'm working with other districts. And what do you have in place that's working? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Mhm.
So the good things are going on. It's not all negative, but we have to become more critical consumers of tools and practices and making sure that it's supporting the needs of our learners.
Mhm. Okay, so how do we strengthen our processes and knowledge in order to increase student literacy achievement? So we want to build what we're doing, and part of wanting to share the science of reading is to help build the capacity or the awareness of the science of reading and empowering our educators to make those decisions to help our students grow. So that's why we were talking today about the science of reading. It's the basis of where we're headed as a state, and we want to make sure that everyone's aware of it and we can start to have some conversations regarding it. We want to make sure that we understand what evidence-based practices are and or how to locate them and how to use them in our classrooms. Because that's a big piece. We want evidence-based strategies to be used because we know that they're going to give us the results and get our students to grow.
And as leaders in a district, you all will be charged with building that capacity within your own districts and buildings back home there. And so getting the conversation moving about that science piece and moving away from conversations like, I like this, I want to use this tool, I've always used this tool. Those are pretty hard. As you all know, you're quite talented individuals that are on here, but it's shifting adults thinking. And we work with many districts to start those conversations. So when Olivia's going to present to you the next few slides on that simple view is if you want a graphic of it printed, if it won't print off of the PowerPoint, we'll be glad to share any of these so to help you support your conversations within your teams.
Do you have the screen up on yours? I just want to make sure
I
in
do.
case anybody raises their hand. Okay. I just was checking in on that. Can everyone hear Nancy well when she speaks?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so here is the simple view. Maybe, nope. Here we go. Oh, this is the simple view of reading from Goff and Tunmer. This is from 1986, so it's been around for a while, but we haven't been talking about it extensively in every venue of education yet. So when we look at this simple view of reading, there's two parts. There's word recognition and language comprehension, which gets us to reading comprehension. But one of the very important pieces that I want you to notice is what is between word recognition and language comprehension.
It just went wonky. Oh, no, it's okay now.
Okay, good. What is in between there?
Multiplication.
Multiplication. So it is not addition, it is multiplication. We must have both sides of this in order to get to reading comprehension. Word recognition are looking at your skills like phonemic awareness, phonics or decoding skills, and sight recognition. And when we say sight recognition, we don't mean high frequency words or sight words as we frequently speak about them in schools. What we're meaning is the automaticity to be able to read words when they see them by sight, because they've gotten so automatic in their phonemic awareness and decoding skills that they can read words quickly by sight, building that automaticity, okay? Language comprehension is where we're talking about pieces like background knowledge, vocabulary, literary structures, genres, syntax, semantics, all those pieces of language. We have to have both of those to get to reading comprehension.
And I'll add that typically in the world of language comprehension on that side of the algorithm, We've gotten a lot of professional development, and we've all gone to it. We've put it on. We've talked about it. What is new to teachers at a classroom level, or relatively new, is the conversation around those word recognition skills that Olivia talked about, and what that can truly look like in a classroom for Tier 1 instruction.
So in our ideal world, right, all of our students are able to, they have word recognition. They're able to read any words we put in front of them and attack them. They also have language comprehension. They have great background knowledge, oral language. They're able to make inferences, all those pieces. And when we have both of those pieces, word recognition and language comprehension, 1 times 1 equals
1.
1. Oh, it already showed up there and I couldn't see it. Sorry. 1. So that's our ideal world. That's what we want every child to get to, right? But we have different students in our classroom, and some of them may present for us. And these are some that are frequent strugglers, are ones that struggle with that word recognition, right? They're still not able to attack those words independently. And yet, if I read a story to them, they can answer those questions. They can have a conversation with me. They have those language comprehension skills. But 0 times 1 equals 0. So we still don't have reading comprehension. That's an important piece. We also have some students that come to us and are able to read any words we put in front of them. They can read fluently, beautifully. They can, any text we give them in any subject area. But when I ask them any questions about what they read, they stare at you blankly, or they are unable to come up with the words to explain what they read, or talk about what they learned, or infer pieces from the text. Okay, these students, and again, here we have 1 times 0, and 1 times 0 equals 0. So we still don't have reading comprehension. Those students that we tend to have that word recognition but lack that language comprehension, sometimes we talk about this as hyperlexic. So they're able to read whatever you put in front of them. And they tend to be, not always, but is characteristic of sometimes our students that are on the spectrum, okay? Because they don't have as the depth of the language comprehension skills. Even more frequently, we have our students that we've been working with a lot, and they've got some word recognition. They're able to decode some words, not everything, but they're able to get there with some supports and different pieces. They also have some language comprehension. They have some background knowledge. They're able to get into the vocabulary. They understand the structure of different types of text. But again, 0.25 times 0.25 equals 0.5. Is that right?
No.
I
No.
typed in the wrong thing. I just realized I changed something on there and I typed it in wrong. So that would be incorrect math, clearly. I apologize for that. That's why I'm a literacy specialist, right?
All can't be math teachers.
That's right, we can't. It used to say, I realized when I edited this, I changed it. It used to say 0.5 times 0.5 equals 0.25 if I did 0.5.
Oh, if you did.
I'll correct that before the next one. Sorry about that.
Yes.
So anyway, needless to say, we're not where we want to be with the reading comprehension. Any questions on that simple view of reading there? Or comments? None?
I don't see.
All right, okay. So as we go on, we're gonna do something. Oh, it's because I clicked on that. All right, we're gonna do a little activity. But before we look at the next slide, I want you guys to share out, and you can either do this in the chat or you can say it out. But can you tell me what percentage accuracy you believe that students need to read at in order to be able to comprehend? Just ballpark.
80 to 85.
80 to 85. Anyone else?
We often see that percentage that you mentioned there on goals on our IEPs too, right? It's very typical.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I would say. I was an intervention specialist for years, and 80% tend to be like the magic percentage that I would put on a lot of goals, right?
We also had a response of 70.
70.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it was kind of where I was like, yeah, 80%, that's about average.
I thought that too. I
You know.
really, really, truly did.
So now I'm going to put us in that situation if we're the students. So we're going to look at a text here with 80% accuracy. So I'm going to give you all a second to read this. When you've all read it, just give me a thumbs up or some sort of signal on the chat is fine.
It's crazy. So I'm
So it's
going
gotta be higher.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
it's gotta be higher.
say, changes to 98%.
Hi, Aiden. How are you? Nice to see you.
Okay. So now that you guys all read that, so that was at 80%. I'm going to show you the next piece. So now I have some questions for you. So who can tell me something about what you remember about what you just read?
Nothing.
Nothing. There was a problem.
There was a problem. What was the setting? Nothing. Silence.
Yeah.
Who was excited? Nope, nobody can answer that. Why were they excited?
Right.
What impressed the narrator of the story? Andrew, what do you think is the age of the narrator and why?
Don't know.
Don't know. No, that was at 80%. Surprising? Or, yep, that's what I thought at 80%. All right, we're gonna look at the same passage, but now with 97% accuracy. And you're gonna read it again. Now I'm gonna ask the same questions. So, who can tell me everything what you just read about?
In line to get tickets for the circus.
Okay. So what's the setting?
Circus.
Circus. Who was excited?
Everybody.
Everybody. Why were they excited?
It's the family that had 12 kids or however many kids they made a big deal about, and they were getting tickets.
Mm-hmm.
They're excited to see the clowns.
The animals and yeah.
Yep. And what do you think is the age of the narrator and why? Around ballpark.
Narrator's an adult because she was paying attention or he was paying attention to how the kids were behaving and what the kids were wearing.
Yeah. So one thing I want you to notice is, did you notice that if you read the second passage more quickly than the first passage?
Absolutely.
It usually makes a big difference, and it's harder when we're on a webinar. But when I do this with people, I always notice that second passage, they get done much more quickly than the first one.
And so going back to what you said, Olivia, about that automaticity and that sight word, that lexicon for our kids, we didn't have to decode it. We didn't have to hold it in our cognitive desk space, right?
Mhm.
We could actually, we do attend to every letter in a word, we now know through MRIs, but that increases that speed,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that automaticity
Yeah.
increases our speed or our fluency, our rate of fluency. I am always cautious of that, because fluency, when we think about fluency, it's not just speed,
Mhm.
it's also accuracy, which is more important than speed, but it also the prosody, the way in which we read, that flow of the words. So thinking about that. But the biggest piece, that the takeaway from that, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from going between the 80% to 97%?
It made sense.
It made sense.
Kind of gave up on the first one, like I'm sure a lot of kids do when nothing makes sense.
Yeah. You just kind of give up.
Did anybody start getting anxious on that first one and frustrated?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Every time I attempt it, I feel that same way. I do.
Yeah.
I just have to know what the second word of the passage was, because I can't get past that word. Like even when I read it the second time, I kept going back to that word, trying to
is
figure
that?
it out.
What could it be? What could it be? What
would make sense? Do you want me to go back to it so you can see it? Oops.
Family was
So there you're looking at it. What do you think that second word could be? My Timladon and I were standing in line to buy tickets for the circus.
It could be my child, it could be my husband, my wife,
My
brother.
friend.
my friend. It's another person that you're going to the circus with.
Yes.
That's where background knowledge comes into this piece, because there's a lot of inferences. If you knew about being in line, if you've been to a circus, if you know about who might go to the circus, that would help you figure out what that word would be.
and what part of the simple view of reading did you really rely upon?
That's the language side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the language comprehension, which oftentimes, like I said before, is we've gotten a lot of professional development and delivered a lot and talked to our staffs about the language comprehension skills. That word recognition is really where we're seeing across the board that there isn't a great understanding of that. So when you're talking to your teams and when you're talking to your staff, consider that. Consider what tools you might use, or where you need to actually start the conversation, because someone might end up just becoming resistant based on that idea of the simple view, just from the sheer title. Well, reading isn't simple. No, it's not, but this is a good way for us to start the conversation.
Mhm. So from this, I'm taking you to another conceptual model. So this is called Scarborough's reading rope, but I want you to see how it links really closely with our simple view of reading. So here I kind of blocked out. So the blue rope is that word recognition, those word recognition skills that we were talking about. And the red is language comprehension. Now here is how those skills break down. When we look at Scarborough's reading rope, these are all the skills that are necessary to make that skilled, fluent reader. So again, in word recognition, where we talked about phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, we've talked about that several times. Language comprehension is our background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge.
So we had a comment that fluency in language and math are very similar. It's about efficiency and the ability to put together and take apart numbers and letters and make sense of them, and not just automaticity. You're right on there,
Mhm.
Shar, that they do link, and we can see this in the different content areas, how we need both sides of the simple view, or both strands or areas of the reading rope.
Yeah.
In science, it looks different than in social studies, slightly.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot, like one of the big pieces I talk about when I'm with groups of teachers of how does literacy impact and what am I doing in my literacy instruction that's going to also support my math instruction or my science or social studies. Finding those links is really important to help support students. And actually linking to what you just said, Shar, a great example, recently I saw William Van Cleve, and he was sharing this story, and it just for me was a powerful aha for me. So I like to share it with others. He was saying how he was working with a group of students. They were all boys because they were attending an all boys private school. He was saying, you know, these students were kids who have had a lot of great opportunities afforded to them in their life. They have, you know, had a lot of academic support, language around them. So they're doing really well, right? But they're in high school and they just took the PSAT and they got their results back. And there was one question that all of the students got wrong. So he then posed the question to them to see why they all got this wrong. And the question was something like, and I'm not going to have it exact, but that you had, it says something about two people having the similar frames of thought in the same lines of thought. The answer was parallel. But every student says, well, I ruled that one out because it's a math word.
Oh.
So this is where when we start to teach vocabulary with our blind, like this, these are our math vocabulary. Here's our science, our social, we have to talk about those interconnectedness of words. And I see someone else put up there. So thinking about that, yes, it does come through all content areas, including language arts. Mm-hmm. Learning print structures, yes. And that's where we speak to, where we were talking about fluency a little bit ago, is thinking about what does fluency look like in the different subject areas? Because if I'm reading a science text, the way I'm reading, my prosody or flow of language is going to be different. My rate is going to change. And we need to make sure that students understand that and we share that with them so that they start to know how to shift the way they read in order to support comprehension.
And in thinking about that reading rope, Olivia, those one of our trainers, Dr. Mary Dahlgren, talked about the word recognition skills, and she used the phrase tadpole skills. And you need to first go through and master your tadpole skills, but it's not that one comes before the other, right? It's concurrently. It's really, Shar, what you were talking about. It comes through all those content areas. Those language comprehension skills, but they're taught concurrently. It just looks different. If you look how wide the rope is, it's not totally braided together when we're first coming off of phonological awareness, decoding, and sight. They're very loose. They're far apart, and that truly is because students don't have those skills mastered, right, Olivia?
Yeah.
That they need a lot more support. But as they build that, not only accuracy, but the automaticity, then the braid gets tighter. Concurrently, the red in that rope, it isn't a braid. It's woven around. It's twisted up within each other. And then how they come together, the blue becomes increasingly automatic, and the red skills, the language comprehension is increasingly strategic. And I think that's important to recognize. So our supports in the classroom would look different. I do, we do, you do in the classroom. In a first grade classroom, it's going to look totally different
Yeah.
than a fourth grade classroom.
So making sure that these pieces are part of your instruction. This is also like this rope, I think, is a great place to help us as educators to know how to share our students' strengths and areas of needs
Good point.
when we're talking about with parents. You know, here are these areas that they are showing great strength, but here are specifically that we know these pieces that your student needs in order to become a fluent reader, and we're struggling in this area. Here are some things that we're doing at school, and then sharing some things that they could do at home to also help support them so that it's a team effort. Okay. Oop. So this is another visual that shows up in the state plan, and it's breaking down that simple view again, but here they're just looking at the word recognition side, and they broke it down with decoding skills, print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and word knowledge. So those skills and how we're developing them. One thing that I want to really hit on that's very important, that, and I share this because from my experience when I was co-teaching in second grade classrooms, one of the first things when we were, you know, in a rush for time would be like, oh, we can just skip over this phonemic awareness part of the lesson because we need to move forward the next part, right? And I was like, yeah, they don't need to do practice that. You know, that's probably not that big of a deal. We'll move on. Now I regret that because I have learned over the years with functional MRIs and looking at our brain, and you see me constantly holding up my hand, this is talking about our reading brain. But for our students that are struggling to read, 80% of them are struggling with phonological awareness, that phonological processing part of their brain.
Listening to
80%.
sounds, right? Listening and manipulating the sounds.
So therefore, that's why it's something that has been identified by the National Reading Panel that needs to be taught every day. It being explicit and systematic in order to support our students. It supports all students, but especially when you're talking about your students that are struggling, we need to make sure it's happening. And where it goes to is highlighting automaticity. So that's where Nancy and I were talking earlier about making sure that they're automatic with those skills and can read them by sight, is moving towards automaticity in those skills. Because if we're not fluent in decoding, they're going to struggle with the prosody in reading the connected text. So when we're looking at this, I want you to, some things to think about as you go back is, how do we assess student knowledge in these areas when they enter into our grade level? How do we explicitly teach all of these skills? And then how do we assess and check in that we're mastering those skills as we're teaching them? And how do we differentiate? So those different pieces to think about when we're looking at these is conversations for back at the ranch, per se. Here is where they break down the language comprehension skills and looking at, you know, academic language, vocabulary, inferential and narrative text, looking at those different pieces. And again, I would leave you with those same questions here. How do you assess the knowledge of your students in these areas as they come into you at each grade level? How do we explicit and systematically teach these skills? And then how do we check in to make sure they're mastering them? What are the varied types of assessments that we can use to check in on our students to make sure they're getting where we need them to be? And I think about this, so this is here, like to give an example, I was with a group of educators and we were having a discussion about, you know, the needs in their classrooms. And one thing that kept coming back up was this comprehension skill, because they had been looking a lot at state tests and the breakdowns of questions. They were like, well, we're seeing across the grade levels that we have students struggling with main idea and supporting details. So we've been doing a lot of activities going back to this because they're not getting it. Now, throughout the day, this conversation kept coming up. So eventually I'm thinking about it, and we know state tests is an important thing in our life, but my question was, so when you're teaching this skill or this strategy, are the students able to do it? And they said, yes, yeah, they know how to do it. We're doing it great in class, but on the test, they aren't doing it. So then my question was, well, then is it that they don't know how to do that skill, or is it that they're unable to access the text in order to do that? Can they read the words? And they were like, they can't read the words. And I said, okay, so is it a word recognition skill or is language comprehension? Where do you need to shift? This is where we have to start asking those deeper why questions when we talk about root cause. Sometimes you have to go deeper. Why is it that they're unable to do that? Not, that was a great get us in the spirit moment. So thinking about those questions to dig deeper, I encourage you to have those discussions as much as possible, to start questioning, to really think deeper. This is our continuum of literacy development from emergent all the way up to adolescent literacy. And this is also in the state plan, but I want you to see the importance for all learners across the continuum, what literacy looks like. And then there's some breakdown below those of some of the skills that you would see at those different different skill levels where they're at, okay?
And so for those of you that write your CCIP goals, or you're developing a reading or a local literacy plan, or a reading in any one of the acronyms, RIPS, RAPS, local literacy, is think about how you're going to build your system to support each of these areas in literacy, from your teams and conversations to your tools, to how you're going to measure it, how you're going to monitor. You might have kids who need progress monitored and a tier 2, but think about first your tier 1 and what that will look like, and what your teachers will need to feel successful in each of these areas, from that whole vertical piece.
And I see a question.
Bonnie.
Where are the tools we can use at the upper secondary levels?
Oh, glad you asked that.
So we're going to start looking, we're going to talk in this next bit a little bit about where we can start systems wise.
Mm-hmm.
But then upper secondary levels, what are your responses?
Well, so you mark these 2 dates down on your calendars, because we have ODE adolescent literacy specialist Rachel Lang and Roger Howard coming in April 21st and 22nd here to the ESC to begin to start talking about the adolescent supports and what districts can start looking at that they already have, and kind of that vertical alignment piece. So we're trying to bring in those folks to continue the conversation. But we'd be glad to talk to you individually as districts, either Olivia or myself, as to what this could look like. And actually, you have another webinar coming up in a week or so that's going to support some of that continued conversation, the IES practice guides.
Oh, we're doing.
We are. We're building it. So
Okay.
you know, it's not readily out there. You're right, Bonnie. So
We can talk
excuse
about
me.
that more, Bonnie.
Yeah.
We definitely can talk about that some more. So and if others have questions, we'll talk about them more, but I want to go ahead and get through this for today. And then if you have other questions, you all have my email. Please feel free to email me and or Nancy, and you'll see it at the end as well with any other questions that you may have. Okay, so how do we use this information to inform our decisions? So this links a little bit to what you were asking, Bonnie, and I know because I've been to Vermillion that you addressed some of these already.
Right.
So figuring out where to start as a district is where a lot of us are struggling. Where do we start here? And we need to analyze some data to determine the root cause as a district system and our instructional levels. So how do we check those different levels to make sure we're supporting our staff and students to increase literacy? There are tools out there. So something that we frequently use in districts is something called a Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or RTFI for short. And this looks at your different teams, resources, implementation, and evaluation.
Did you do it with Vermillion?
I did.
Okay.
So it looks at these big buckets to start with to help see where as a system you need to grow first to help support all, okay? And then helping you find evidence-based tools to be critical in planning effective plans that can help develop your staff and students. Then we move down the continuum and look at our instructional practices and focusing again on those prioritized skills by the simple view and our standards rather than, and this takes it away, using something like the reading tiered fidelity inventory and looking at these evidence-based strategies and selecting them takes it away from that personal, like what I like to do, what I think is best, and is looking at the facts so that it's not something personal. This is not me saying, oh, I don't like what you're doing. It's not at all. It's looking at the facts of what is evidence-based and prioritized skills and you selecting in that way.
And that'll help you as leaders be able to get further in those conversations versus that we have folks that want to hold on to things they love. We used to call them the love units, right? And so if you haven't done the RTFI, that's something Olivia or I can help a district get started on doing.
Mm-hmm. And then helping know where to take it from there.
Yes.
So not just doing it, but then what are our next steps? Because that tends to be a place we get stuck to. Sometimes we get all this data, but then where do we go with it? We have to know how to analyze it and move from there. So just to really quickly share with you, and this is quick, but we do have a webinar coming up in the spring where we'll be going over the big 5 ideas of literacy. So many of us are more familiar with the big 5 ideas of literacy of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. But we've also identified the big 5 ideas for adolescent literacy. And that's a little shift, and some of it kind of blends together a little bit, but what are those pieces? That advanced word work we were talking about earlier, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and motivation. And how does that motivation weave into those different areas, and how do we get our kids engaged in that learning? So we are using literacy acquisition and achievement as a lever for sustainable school improvement. We need to find ways to look at our literacy and analyze where we're at as a system, as a district, and instructionally to make sure that we can carry out explicit instruction for all of our students and support them. So that's what we're working on, the purpose of this plan to move us forward. Now, in closure, so I said at the beginning, our goals were that we could explain the simple view of reading and say why it's important. So, first question, who wants to try to explain the simple view of reading? And don't worry, we'll all help you out. Give it a try. No volunteers, give it a try. So what was that first part? What were those skills that we talked about in the first part?
Word recognition.
Word recognition.
Multiplied by language comprehension.
Correct. Equals?
Reading comprehension.
Reading comprehension. Beautiful. Thank you. So that's our simple view of reading. It's very simplified, but it's a great place to start and then bring it back to make sure we're really hitting those skills in both areas to get to reading comprehension.
And as Olivia said in the beginning, Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement, that's the first conceptual model that it's grounded in. And what that has implications for all of our districts in Ohio is when you're writing your local literacy plan, when you're doing those any kind of plan, a reading improvement plan, if that's the situation you're in. We really are looking for our schools to align to that, those conceptual models, as she said earlier. You've got some grant opportunities that'll be coming out. If you don't consider and write in your plans to align, it'll kind of take you out of the running, because the expectation is we have that national crisis. We know we need to shore up some of that word recognition skills and those kind of tools that Olivia mentioned can guide us there. But please, please, please consider reaching out to us if you need more technical assistance and support in moving your district forward in having these conversations. We'll be glad to help.
And that leads into the next part. So why is a simple view of reading important? Does anyone want to give me a quick response to that? Because I know our time is up and I want to honor your time. I know you all have places to be.
Simple view of reading is important because if you don't focus on both sides of that equation, students are not going to be successful as readers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the crux of it. There's a lot more we can add to that, I'm sure, but that's the crux of it right there. Here's our contact information. So like I said, if you want to email either one of us with any questions, we'll be happy to help out in any way we can. Does anybody have any questions or comments as we're at the end here today? Oops.
Olivia, do you just have like any kind of words of quick wisdom about the brain development as it leads to struggling readers? Like, we just feel like we've got a lot of our first graders who are really not developmentally ready to move on and use these basic phonological skills to lead to that fluency and to that automaticity. Like, they're just not ready. How do we push them?
So I think that part of that is also looking at your system of support. Like, as a district, think about their oral language exposure and what tools are you using to help instruct them. Because yes, one thing we're commonly hearing is that we have a lot of students struggling, right?
We do, and one of the things we found out in the literacy project is when we think about that capacity and to support our teachers in taking that critical look is districts employ the speech and language pathologist. We're not asking that they identify the kids, but continue to have the conversations about that oral language and what it could look like, even beginning as young as preschool. And on your parent literacy nights and engagement, I'm finding that lots of parents don't truly have a real understanding how critical oral language really is. I think we're much too quiet these days. Maybe we're not interacting as much, or our parents could a little more, and just truly taking it slow and are we having, do we see 30-second conversations happening in classrooms for those kiddos who are displaying a lower level of oral language? That's one way in this learning process we could start. And who needs it more than others? So taking it in small steps and guiding teachers to say weekly, you're going to have, let's try to have, set a goal to have 4, 5, 6, 30-second conversations. In the literacy project, we've been doing that, and it's tough. 30 seconds is it seems like a short period of time, right?
Yeah.
But when you're talking to a kid and it's not the adult producing it, we want the child to produce the oral language through our prompts and questions. So there's one small thing that we implemented in the classrooms in the project, and it is showing an impact. Their amount of utterances are increasing. And then that works on the other hand, that it's not all business talk. It becomes academic talk because they're willing to take a risk and just put the words out there in an attempt. So we can have a further conversation of what that can look like. And we have some video examples too.
Awesome, thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
And then also, Dan, you asked, are there, do you know of anyone who's using the strands of the reading rope to diagnose how to best support at-risk learners, particularly in IAT? Is there anyone who breaks down at-risk readers by the reading strands? I know I've worked with some varied school psychologists and different IAT teams where discussions have started to happen a lot more of looking at that simple view and those strands to break it down. Do I know anyone that explicitly uses it? I'm not sure they explicitly use it in that manner, but as we're trying to develop more discussion around the simple view and Scarborough's reading rope, I think it's an excellent tool to have. In fact, I used to joke with my teachers that I wanted a tattoo on my arm of the reading rope so that I could like cite it at any point in time. They got me temporary tattoos of that, but it is a great resource to use. And I think the more comfortable we all get with it, it could be used more frequently to really truly speak to those strengths and needs.
Okay. No, that's good. It'd be an interesting conversation to get into on one specific child and what the teacher thinks is some of the areas of concern. And it may help them strategically support the child a little differently too.
Well, and also, Dan, like you said, it also helps you look strategically at where do I need to assess their needs and then intervene, which links back to the earlier question of what do we know about the brain if we have first graders who are struggling with getting that automaticity. We do know that where you need to step back to is looking at that oral language and that phonological awareness, because most likely those skills aren't automatic yet. And that's where we need to start.
And Dan, a great resource for the adults is Dr. David Kilpatrick's Essentials book, and also his Equipped for Reading Success. Those are two wonderful, Equipped for Reading Success is a wonderful, quick, easy read that could help move, well, I guess the best way to say it is when he talks about the subtypes of reading difficulties, it makes us think about particularly 3 areas. There's a double deficit model that he really refers to, and it's a great visual. It's it's a Venn diagram with 3 circles. That's in both of the books that I mentioned, but it gets the teachers really thinking critically about, as Olivia said, where the strengths are and where some gaps might be for each individual student.
Well, and one of the tools we've been working on in Bay has been with our literacy specialists and our teachers is a toolkit that not only says, here's strategies that work when you see this particular gap in the reading rope, but also what does it look like and sound like? Because I think part of it is just an education on not just the kid is having issues with reading, but what does it look like and sound like specifically if it's a decoding problem? What does it look like and sound like specifically if it really is an oral language piece? So I think that work and those conversations are helpful in building teacher understanding of how to be a little more diagnostic.
And that's one of the big things Nancy and I'll talk about is teaching. We want teachers to become diagnostic and then prescriptive in their instruction. So it's not just, we're not guided by a curriculum per se, we're guided by our students' needs. And how do we align that with the standards and their needs? So looking at those pieces, being that critical consumer of the tools that we have with us to instruct effectively for all of our students. I know that we are past our time here and I know you need to get going. So does anybody have any other pressing questions? Or if you need to step out, I understand that too. So email if you have anything. I may email you all back with evaluation. If you can give us some feedback of how we could improve, I would really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day.
Yep,
Happy holidays and Happy New Year.